Tensions over family separation and illegal immigration at the U.S.-Mexico border hits an all-time high. I'm John Prophet, and this is The John Prophet Show.
The final defeat of ISIS.
Fire and fury.
The Thomas Fire is now the third largest wildfire in modern California history.
Hurricane Harvey, which has been slamming parts of Texas pretty much all day.
What I call the basket of deplorables.
You are fake news.
Russia's interference in the 2016 election.
Gorsuch will now fill the Supreme Court seat left vacant by the death of Justice Antonin Scalia.
So Donald Trump nixed the Iran deal.
The United States Supreme Court is allowing the Trump administration to enforce the latest version of the president's travel ban.
Build that wall. Build that wall. Build that wall. Build that wall. Build that wall.
So, hey everyone, thanks for watching and listening. So last week I briefly mentioned the stuff going on down at the U.S.-Mexico border. So I want to just give a little recap before we get into it. So back in '97, there was this thing called the Flores Agreement. And the Flores Agreement basically ruled, according to the Ninth Circuit Court, that when a family, or a group of people entered the country illegally, if there's children with them, the children have to be separated from the family and then released out of custody after 20 days. So this is not something that Trump just started. This was the policy under the Obama administration. There's a slight difference in the way they're enforcing the policy. Obama didn't really enforce it, and now Trump obviously is. You look at some of these things happening down at the border, and no matter what administration it happens under, it's obviously a travesty. It's really sad. I just want to first talk about some of the things going on under the Obama administration. You had children being separated from their families. Even though people try to act like it wasn't happening under Obama, it's obviously still happening under Trump, or at least it was. We'll get into that. Under Obama, you had border control stations that had widespread deplorable conditions. They failed to meet the minimum legal requirements for facilities that house children. The Obama administration admitted to using these facilities and the separation of children as a deterrent. The problem is, even if you want families to stay together, you can't because of this ruling. The 20-day ruling. And one of the reasons they do this is because they're trying to stop human trafficking, they're trying to stop abuse of children, all of these things. If a 40-year-old man and a 12-year-old girl show up to the U.S.-Mexico border, we don't necessarily know that they're related, that that's his daughter. So that's one of the big reasons they're doing this, is to kind of make sure we aren't having abuse of children. Obviously, we can preface this by saying, if you don't send your child here, if you don't come here with your child here, you won't be separated. It really is a problem. The facilities are bad. The conditions aren't great. They're running out of space, so that they're basically making these makeshift enclosures for children, and they're chain link fences, and so they essentially look like giant cages. It's not good. I just want to say a common lie from the left in this whole situation has been that this isn't the law. It is the law. When these children enter the country with adults that claim to be their parents, they have to be separated and they have to be released from custody after 20 days. So what's commonly happens is they're placed in some kind of foster care situation. They're given to a parent, a relative who's already in the country. Oftentimes they're given to friends or like I said, distant relatives. The problem is sometimes the people they're placed with are also illegal immigrants, and they don't want to contact the government out of fear of being deported themselves. So oftentimes we do lose these children because the people they're with who they don't want to basically be in contact with the government. So that's another aspect of this. Even that Trump's now decided to bring these families back together, we're having some difficulty actually locating some of the children. I've even seen Republicans try to claim this isn't the law, but it is. And this really is a result of a much larger problem. It's the illegal immigration problem. Like I said previously, the main difference between the Obama administration and the Trump administration when it comes to this was that Trump is actually arresting people. He's prosecuting them. Obama, his policy was the catch and release policy, which is basically if you enter the country illegally as a family, or I guess actually all people who enter the country illegally, you're detained when you first come in. They process you. They say, here's your court date from three months from now. we'll see you then. And then the people who they released, a lot of times they don't come back. It's about 4 out of 10 people, about 40% of the people don't come back to for their court date, and they're just in the country. The courts are backlogged. The detention centers are overrun. The ICE agents in the border are overwhelmed. Like I said, they're making these makeshift cages or enclosures, whatever you want to call them. They look like cages, but I don't think if we had children in these same situations and we put up drywall as opposed to fence, I don't think the situation would be any better. They're still being detained in these areas. I've even seen cases where because they've run out of space in local detention centers, they've had to set up makeshift centers in like rundown old closed Walmarts, and they're just like building these little enclosures in these Walmarts. Clearly, these are not the conditions we want these children to be in. We need to provide more funding, obviously, to basically remedy some of these situations. So a big concern is that over the last 5 months, there's been a 313% increase in fraudulent claims of people who are trying to enter the country, and they're claiming that they're fraudulently claiming that they're family members. So this is going way up. I do want to point out that a lot of the family, so Trump's getting a lot of heat for family separation. I want to point out a lot of the family separation when it comes to illegal immigration into the U.S., it actually stems from the separation actually occurs when the parents send the children on their own. There's 12,000 children currently in custody. 10 of the 12,000 were separated from their family when their family sent them alone on this dangerous journey. You hear these stories about there's a 12-year-old girl who showed up to the border alone, and she was on birth control because her parents knew that she needed to be on birth control because they knew she was going to be raped and sexually assaulted on the trip. There's a 4-year-old. You have a story of a 4-year-old girl showing up to the border, nothing but a T-shirt with her parents' names written across it. So a lot of troubling things are going on, and at the border. And no matter which side of the aisle you are on, we need to show some compassion in a sense, and try and make sure things are much better for the people who are in these situations. I want to get into the responses from both sides. As you can imagine, you can probably guess how the left reacted to this.
Thanks, John. You weren't born yesterday. You knew how controversial this tweet would be. Let's put it back up again so people can see it. Why did you decide to send that out?
Yeah, I guess I wanted to grab people's attention, John, because as I reflected on this Saturday afternoon, this seemed to be a very important matter.
So many people on the left are making this the Nazi comparison, the Nazi Germany comparison. These are concentration camps, so this is Nazi-esque. You really, this is widespread. I mean, even Johnny on our show, we've heard it both ways. He made the same comparison, and I over the weekend, I pushed back on that a little bit because I don't think it's quite fair. You have a lot of people getting on this narrative. Chris Hayes from MSNBC, former General Hayden, former director of the CIA, made the comparison. I mean, people on the left are calling Republicans, not just people involved in the actual detention, but any Republican. They're referring to them as, or comparing them to Nazi prison guards. The only problem is, sure, children and parents are being separated at the border. And that did happen at concentration camps in Nazi Germany. But in Nazi Germany, when these families were separated, they were then all murdered. That's not at all what's happening here. You see the Japanese internment camps comparison. I feel like that's slightly more accurate. Though in that case, all the Japanese people who were interned, which was obviously a horrific thing, all those Japanese people who were interned were American citizens at the time. The people who were crossing the border illegally and are detaining currently are not American citizens. So that's a little bit of a difference there. But besides from the Nazi thing, the Japanese internment camp comparison, some of the really gross things I've seen are things like, you had celebrities coming out saying that Barron Trump should be locked in a cage with pedophiles and basically ass raped, because he's Melania and Donald Trump's son. You have Sarah Huckabee Sanders. She was at a restaurant over the weekend called, I believe it was the Red Hen in Northern Virginia. The owner kicked her out. They asked her to leave. And that's completely acceptable because when you own an establishment, when you're a business person, you're allowed to refuse service to the people you want. That just because you're allowed to do that doesn't necessarily mean it's right. I obviously talked about this a lot with the Masterpiece Cake Shop case. They had the right to refuse service, and so did this restaurant. Sarah Huckabee Sanders responded with this. Last night, I was told by the owner of Red Hen in Lexington, Virginia, to leave because I work for POTUS, and I politely left. Her actions say far more about her than about me. I always do my best to treat people, including those I disagree with, respectfully, and will continue to do so. So like I said, you have a right to kick someone out of your restaurant if you want to, if you're the owner. Like I said, the Masterpiece Cake Shop, he had the right to not make the cake. The people, though, the funny thing is, the people who are cheering this owner for kicking Sarah Huckabee Sanders out of the restaurant, they're the same people that were saying, how dare you refuse to bake that cake for that gay wedding. So obviously you see a little bit of hypocrisy there on the left. You had other situations, particularly over the weekend, of horrible things happening to people in the Trump administration. Kirsten Nielsen, the HHS secretary, she was eating at a restaurant, and a group of protesters basically mobbed her and forced her out of the restaurant by shouting at her. This is a completely different situation than the owner kicking her out. The owner has the right to refuse service and to kick her out. You do not have a right to storm into someone else's restaurant and start yelling at one of their customers and demand that they leave. You don't have a right to do that. Pam Bondi, the Florida Attorney General, she went to this. She went to a screening of a documentary about Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And because she was a Republican and because she was at this documentary screening, when she left, she was verbally attacked and abused, and she even had protesters spit on her. This is obviously disgusting behavior. Maxine Waters, I'm sure you guys know who Maxine Waters is. Very liberal, almost crazy congresswoman from LA or from California, LA area. She was the one during the LA riots. She was calling them the LA uprisings and was praising them. I'll remind you, the LA uprisings, the LA riots actually resulted in billions of dollars in property damage and resulted in deaths of innocent people. So, and she was praising that, so that's obviously not a good thing. Maxine Waters came out most recently and said that if you see a person from the Trump administration in public, you should verbally attack them. You should get a group of people, mob around them, and basically kick them out of wherever in public they are, basically chase them off. This is more of a fascist, Nazi-esque tactic than anything the Trump administration has been using. This is very much a brown coat tactic. Back when the Nazis were gaining power, they would go to people who they disagreed with groups of people with mobs and basically verbally attack them and try and, basically use violence and the threat of violence to basically shut people down and basically kick people out and get people to behave the way they want them to. Another example of escalating tensions revolving around this issue was there were protesters at a detention center in Texas. They attempted to break into this detention center, actually break down the gates. This is a federal facility. This would be a federal crime, a huge crime. They attacked a bus that was transporting illegal immigrants to another facility as the bus was trying to leave. And actually one of the Border Patrol agents who was actually trying to protect an elderly illegal immigrant during this whole scuffle actually ended up with a broken ankle. You have liberal activists they basically doxed a bunch of people, a bunch of ICE agents. So they sent out a bunch of info about the ICE agents online, where they live, where their children live, where their children go to school, and they've been actively encouraging protesters and activists to go to the ICE agents' houses and scream at them and yell at them and berate them and even go to the ICE agents' children's schools and yell at the children and scare the children and things like that. I mean, this is obviously unacceptable. Attitudes and behaviors in this country recently have started to get really ugly, really heated, and it's unacceptable.
I don't think. I think fundamentally they've got the right idea, right? They don't want mistreatment of fellow human beings. Okay, fundamentally that's fine, but there are a million and one ways to go about that.
Right.
That aren't doxing ICE agents
right.
and breaking into facilities and
right, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, as slow as it is, that's why we have the legal system that we do to get things done that way. And I know that everything is about now in this day and age, but you can't just certain stuff you just can't do, you know?
Yeah. And I don't think, and that's exactly right. Certain things you just can't do, and it's not appropriate behavior, and I don't think anyone's saying it's okay to mistreat children. I don't think even the people who are supporting the hardliners of the Trump administration aren't saying, yeah, we like seeing these images of these children. I don't think anyone does. Another instance, this is more of a delayed instance, kind of. A story in the Associated Press came out talking about a child detention center in Virginia, where children, and the whole story was talking about this center and the abuse of teenage immigrants in the center. They were tied to chairs, they were beaten. Horrible stuff. And, not until 19 paragraphs down do they mention in the story that this all happened under the Barack Obama administration. Before they mentioned this detail, and they didn't call him by name, they said the previous administration. This happened under the previous administration in paragraph 19. And prior to that, they had mentioned Donald Trump's name 7 times. Clearly, this is biased coverage of the media trying to make it look like, this is another incident related to the Donald Trump administration, what was happening, and it's not good under any administration.
Well, it's
I'm simply pointing out the media bias in this.
It's not new that the media has it out for the president, and no matter how you feel about it, like, it's just a fact, I think that this story, it doesn't need to be about that, though. How the story is about, to me at least, the mistreatment of immigrants, and what was happening in that facility was not okay, regardless of where we're pointing the finger.
Right.
So it's
Of course, yeah. That the stories were horrific. I was completely appalled to hear about that. It is also offensive though to see the media trying to pass this off as this is a Donald Trump thing when clearly it's not solely Donald Trump, and that's been a big narrative, is that this stuff wasn't happening under Obama, and I'm 100% on
that it was.
Exactly. I'm 100% on the page of we need to make things better for the people who are in these conditions, but at the same time, I have to point out the media hypocrisy when it comes to this.
Understandable, yeah.
Yeah. So liberal members of Congress have pretty much perfected the deer in the headlights look when it comes to being asked questions by the media as to why they are now outraged by these conditions under Trump, but weren't outraged by these conditions under Obama.
They were all there in 2014 under President Obama. And my question to you, Senator Baldwin, is did you speak up against them then?
On this issue that we get into a moment where we're making progress, and then when it stalls, we turn around. I think we all need to continue to be focused on it and press it through.
So clearly, a lot of these members are clearly having trouble coming up with excuses for what they say. When you see, these senators and congressmen stuttering, I don't know what to say. But believe it or not, the media coverage actually got slightly worse. So Time Magazine published a cover article, and it basically, if you look at the cover here, Donald Trump is smiling, smirking down at this young immigrant girl, and the little girl is crying, and the headline says, "Welcome to America." So this little girl is obviously kind of being pushed as the cover girl for the Trump administration's policy on separating children from parents. It turns out the girl was never separated from her parents. She was from Honduras, and the reason she was crying was because her mother briefly put her down when she was talking to Border Patrol agents, and the mom said she's hungry, she's tired, so she's upset. And as soon as the mom picked the girl back up, she immediately stopped crying. The father even came out saying, she wasn't separated at the border. In fact, she was separated from me when the mother and our 3 other children when the mother took her from Honduras. And the Honduras officials actually came out and backed up these claims. She was a political dissident. She ran away from her family, and you clearly see the media trying to spin this. But Rachel Maddow gave her a typical response.
Oh, hold on. To at least 3. Can we put up the graphic of this? Thank you. Do we have it? No.
And it's ridiculous when you see liberal members of the media coming, having these responses, being so outraged, calling Trump a Nazi, actually openly weeping on set of their show. It's pretty disheartening, especially when you actually know the facts of a lot of the stories. But of course, you didn't get bad reactions from just people on the left.
I read today about a 10-year-old girl with Down syndrome who was taken from her mother and put in a cage. I read about did you say want to a 10-year-old with Down syndrome being taken from her mother?
What I said is you can pick anything you want, but the bottom line is very clear.
How dare you?
When you cross the border illegally.
So this was obviously a completely inappropriate and disgusting response from Corey Lewandowski. You can show support for what the Trump administration is doing, trying to enforce the law, but still show sympathy and empathy for what these people are going through. I mean, some of these people have left behind horrific lives. They're trying to make a better life for themselves, and don't basically make fun of or make light of the hardships that they've gone through to try and get to what is the greatest country in the world. I mean, I sympathize for them. If I was in the same situation, I'd be trying to get here too. So we don't need to be making fun of them for trying to improve their lives. But the GOP did put forward a standalone clean bill, and the Democrats decided en masse that they were going to pass on supporting the bill.
Legislation is not the way to go here when it's so easy for the president to sign it. It's an excuse.
So the Democratic Party refused to support bipartisan legislation that would have solved this problem outright. Because Trump was feeling the pressure and because he probably wanted to try and make things better at the border, he completely and utterly undercut his defense of his zero-tolerance immigration policy when he signed an executive order to end the separation of families at the border.
Thank you very much. We're signing an executive order I consider to be a very important executive order. It's about keeping families together while at the same time being sure that we have a very powerful, very strong border, and border security will be equal, if not greater, than previously. So we're going to have strong, very strong borders, but we're going to keep the families together. I didn't like the sight or the feeling of families being separated. There's a problem that's gone on for many years, as you know, through many administrations, and we're working very hard on immigration. It's been just left out in the cold. People haven't dealt with it, and we are dealing with it.
So Trump stated, we're going to be signing an executive order in a little while. We've got to be keeping families together. This is likely illegal. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled about the Obama-era policy of keeping children together with parents that it violated the 1997 Flores settlement. Children will no longer be separated from their families at the border. This does, however, mean children will be held in overcrowded adult detention facilities with their parents and with other illegal immigrant adults. I hope we don't start sending children of people to prison. I hope we don't start sending the children of people we send to prison with them. So as soon as Trump signed this executive order, liberal politicians started making statements about how it wasn't enough. So this is what they have been calling for. We have to keep these families together. We have to keep these families together. And as soon as Trump made it so the families would get it together, we got this.
But let us be clear that the executive order that he issued today goes nowhere as far as it should go.
So I think liberals are a little bit upset that Trump, in a short-term sense of things, solved the problem. He's basically making it so families aren't going to be separated anymore, and the Democrats didn't do anything to try and help that. Trump comes off as having a little bit of heart. He comes off as a man of action who takes action to get things done. And it doesn't look like the Democrats really got involved. They're kind of sitting on the sidelines in this case. I still am very skeptical about whether the Democrats and Congress really want to solve this. Like I said, they could have solved it by passing a law, and they didn't.
So the Democrats want open borders. Let everybody come in. Let everybody pour in. We don't care. Let them come in from the Middle East. Let them come in from all over the place. We don't care. We're not going to let it happen. Democrats don't care about the impact of uncontrolled migration on your communities, your schools, your hospitals, your jobs, or your safety. Democrats put illegal immigrants before they put American citizens. What the hell is going on?
So Dems could pass legislation, like I said, and stop this. And until the Democrats, as a party, basically back bipartisan legislation to prevent this, actually pass a law, not just an executive order that will likely get struck down by the courts, until they get on board with a clean bill that does nothing but separate, stop the separation of families and children. Until they support that, I don't really believe that they want to stop the separation. Democrats had control of Congress from 2009 to 2011, and they passed 0 immigration laws. I really believe they love the issue. I think they want to run on it in 2018. I guess you can only truly solve the problem through legislation, because the executive order, it'll go to the courts like it did, previously when they ruled on the Flores agreement, and they're likely going to rule Trump's executive order unconstitutional and illegal. And they're not gonna, and we're gonna be back to square one. We're gonna be right back to where we were when this all started.
There's such a team mentality when it comes to politics, and that really gets in the way. I don't think that's anything bold to state. I think that that's a pretty common theme. People who vote some people who vote for the Republican candidate at any year at any given point are doing so, or the Democrat candidate, like any candidate, libertarian, whoever.
Yeah.
People who vote for a certain candidate there's a large chunk of the population that does that because they've been doing it for years. Yet, regardless of how much each party has changed in the past couple of decades, they're still going to keep voting for whoever their candidate is because that's their team.
Yeah. Yeah.
Instead of voting for who might actually do a better job.
Yeah.
And in that sense, it's similar in Congress. I think that might be part of the reason Congress doesn't get things done quickly or maybe even at all.
Yeah.
Is because they don't want to see the other side win. And at a certain point, we're better than this, people.
Yeah.
You'd think grown people with decades of experience and maybe some morals. Everybody's got some form of morals.
Yeah.
They would hopefully do what they think is right versus trying to, it's the equivalent of trying to keep the other team from scoring a touchdown.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It's not as simple as that. It goes beyond. It's not a game.
I think you make a great point. Actually, we do very much have this team politics, this tribalism of which side are you on, and I think it comes out even stronger than a lot of issues in this particular issue. And based on the actions and I'm only saying this based on the actions the Democrats have taken so far, but based on their actions so far, it seems like what the two sides are: we want to defend the borders from the right. We have borders, we want to defend them. And from the left, it seems like we don't want to enforce the borders, we want to let people in. And the reason I say that is because of this. We want to stop separations, but then when we stop separations, they're still not happy. If you look at the Flores Agreement, you look at the law, if you don't want them to be separated and you aren't okay with them being kept together, the only alternative is to openly release all illegal immigrants into the interior of the United States of America. I don't think that's going to be a big selling point. I think you're going to have trouble on a debate stage basically saying that all the Constitution applies to all people in the world, and that borders are unnecessary. I don't think that's going to be a strong selling point. I think you're going to struggle with that. Trump's not going to stop enforcing the immigration laws. I mean, he ran very hard on it. I mean, build the wall. It's not. He was pretty. He wasn't very ambiguous about what he was going to do. He made it pretty clear when he was running for office how he felt about these laws.
And I say it's very strongly the Democrats' fault. They're they're really obstructionist, and they are obstructing. The United States will not be a migrant camp, and it will not be a refugee holding facility. Won't be. You look at what's happening in Europe, you look at what's happening in other places. We can't allow that to happen to the United States, not on my watch.
So some people say this should be used as a way to discourage illegal immigration. I don't agree. I'm not a big fan of this position. I don't think we should be using children in that way. At the same time, you do have to know if you're someone coming here that the current policy is you're locked up when your children are locked up too. So it shouldn't be used as a deterrent, but it is there. I mean, people know now. I mean, word's gonna get back to Honduras, El Salvador, even Mexico, that it's happening. Like I said, it's according to the left, it's inhumane to keep children away from their parents, but then once you put them back, it's also inhumane to keep them together. That's why I say I really do think they want mass release.
I think because people don't want to see kids locked up at all,
right?
Because it's really not their choice. But think about all the vacations.
That's why we stopped locking them up. We stopped keeping them with their families and we put them in foster care. But then they said the Democrats, lost it. They said we can't do that. It's like, well, we were doing what you said previously to not keep them locked up, and we freed them.
Well,
and they said that's unacceptable, so now we put them back, and now they're saying that's unacceptable.
I understand.
So it's like, what do they want?
I think at that point it's a reform for the foster care system, because I think if I recall correctly, and I might be misinformed, but that the foster care system has not been
it's not
the best
good, and it's not
forever.
good. And if that's what you think needs to be the solution, is we need foster care reform, then why aren't Democrats saying that? They're not. They're saying we can't keep them locked up, and that's after they were saying we have to bring them back into detainment. Obviously, I'm not saying the wall is the right way to go. I think it would stop illegal immigration a little bit, but I think overall, if you do harden the borders a little bit, I think this obviously won't be a problem. But that's not, you're going to get a lot of pushback from that, particularly on the left. I mean, you have a candidate running for governor of New York State who thinks we should actually abolish ICE. Like I said, open borders. One of my biggest problems with letting people into the country is just that we have this gigantic social safety net built into our country. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, welfare. Like you can get a lot of entitlements from the government. Particularly if you're an uneducated, English is your second language, illegal immigrant. You can get a lot of support from the government. I don't necessarily, if you're going to come in, you're going to work hard, you're going to make money, and you're going to be a contributing member of society, come on in. I have no problem with that. But if you're going to mooch off the government, I mean, these entitlements is that's what's driving our national debt. We're already so far in debt. We can't keep letting it happen, and we don't need to be letting in more people if they're going to just not carry their own weight and be contributing members of society. I don't, like I said, until the Democrats back legislation, I don't think they actually want to stop this. They're going to be their big issue, I think. And, I thought at first it was going to be guns, was going to be their 2018, big running campaign issue. I think it's going to be this now. And I don't think they want to necessarily solve it, even if they claim they do, because why aren't they putting something forward to try and solve it?
It's team mentality. I think that the majority of it would have been solved if everybody lets the president do what he wanted to do and with the executive order. But at that point they're losing and they don't want to lose. If everybody would just, this is the idealist in me speaking, if everybody would just put aside their team for what might be at least a little bit better treatment of those involved, maybe we'd be better off.
A lot of people come to me and they say on social media, they reach out to me, well, this isn't you don't seem very compassionate when you're talking about this. You don't seem to think the government should be compassionate when it comes to this. Well, the government can't feel feelings, only people can. I don't think the government should be compassionate. I don't think it's capable of being compassionate. I think what the government's there to do is enforce the laws. If you don't like the laws, you can change them. But what happens is it falls on the people. It falls on individuals to be compassionate. You can help these people. You can help these families. You can give them money. You can send money back to their countries. You can do all kinds of, there's all kinds of charities. There's all kinds of things you can volunteer for. It's up to the people to be compassionate. The government has to enforce the laws. If you don't like the laws, which, they're not very good right now because we're detaining children, we need to get them changed, and we need to stop having pushback from the left when it comes to changing these laws. So there's no nice way, there's no pleasant way to enforce immigration laws or, most laws. But just because it's not nice, just because it's unpleasant, it doesn't mean it's not right and just. I mean, these are the laws, we have to follow them. It's not when someone who's an American citizen commits a crime, and they get locked up, they get put in prison. It's not pleasant experience. It's not something we enjoy. We don't enjoy putting people in prison. At least we shouldn't enjoy that. But if someone commits murder, for example, it's the right thing to do to lock them up, even if we don't like it. It's the right thing to enforce our border. I used this analogy the other day. If I really do think a country is not a country without borders. If you build a house and you don't put up walls, it's not a house. You're sitting or sleeping in a field somewhere. A country is not a country without borders. I think just because we want them to enforce the laws doesn't mean we should be inhumane. We need to make things better. We need to make things more, don't separate the families. But I do think once they cross over the border, they're going to have to send them back unless we're going to change our immigration laws. I understand people trying to come here illegally. I sympathize with them. I would do the exact same thing. I think America's an awesome country. I genuinely believe at this point, it's the best country, the freest country the world's ever seen, and I understand why people want to come here. It's pretty great. I think a lot of times people don't consider, people push back on the whole, the country, it's not a country without borders thing. I really do believe this because, what have we seen in the history of our world? What is it? What is history? It's using violence, using whatever means at your disposal to basically establish, maintain, expand the borders of your country. A lot of people rag on Christopher Columbus because he came over here and stole America and stole territory from the Native Americans. And people say, well, you can't keep, you can't be illegal in a country or a nation or a land that was stolen from people. Well, what do you think was happening before Christopher Columbus came here? The Native Americans, they were trying to establish, maintain, expand their borders. They were killing each other. They were fighting each other to try and expand their own territories, their own nations. And that's exactly what Christopher Columbus did. That's exactly what every society has done since the beginning of time. There's been wars, battles, other types of armed conflicts to establish and maintain and expand borders. I'm not saying America should expand its borders at this point, but I have no problem as a country defending our borders because right now, at least, there are borders and they're our country. It's our country. But I really do think we need more funding. We need funding to make sure these children and the adults even are not being treated inhumanely, to make sure they do have proper care, food, clothes, everything that they need. And we need expanded funding for that. And I'm not a big fan of the government getting involved in a lot of things, but I think this is something they should be. Defending the borders and then making sure the people who you're defending them against you're still treating humanely. I think that's something that very much is worth government involvement. But at this point, we're pretty, people, it's not a deterrent as far as the separation. We're not doing it anymore currently until it goes through the court system. But just know, if you cross our border, if you come here illegally, you will be arrested, you will be detained temporarily, and you will be sent back eventually. That's our policy now. They're going to start, they're not going to separate families, but if a family crosses the border and they're illegal, they're going to put them on the bus and they're going to send them back. If you're actually fleeing something horrible in your country, you actually need help, you have legitimate asylum claims, go to a legal port of entry. Tell them what's your situation. Tell them who you are. Tell them you're claiming asylum. They will not treat you like an illegal immigrant. They will not, detain you in the ways they have been, and they will not separate your families in any way. That's the way you should come to the country if you really need to get in.
What I want to know is, how hard is it to catch somebody at the border, register them as somebody who's done it in the past, put them on a bus, drive them to the nearest capital city in Central or South America, and then drive back? How hard is it? Like, you'd think that it's really simple, right? You don't even, maybe you need to detain them max couple of days. Well, they're breaking the law. Where do we put people who break the law? A prison, right?
Right.
And then, but they're not going to stay in the prison because that's American tax dollars and they're not American people. So,
right. You send them back.
So you just send them back. Why is that not what are we doing that isn't that? Is that, maybe I'm uninformed.
So, well, for the previous administration, so that's what we are doing now. The previous administration did deport a lot of people, but, we had that whole catch and release thing. We weren't sending them back, and to an extent. No, Obama did deport a lot of people, but he very much also there's a lot of people he let free because of his catch and release policy. The main difference now is we're actually enforcing the border, and it takes a while to find, before what was happening was we weren't able to send them back right away because we were separating the families because we couldn't keep the children there. So it would take a while to get the children back if we got them back to the parents at all. But I think there are some governmental roadblocks when it comes to deporting people back to their country. The process does take a little while. You have to line it up. There's planning. The government already moves really slow as it is. You have to line up with the other governments of the other nations to make sure you're sending these people to the right places at the right time. You know where you're sending them. A lot of them are even sent on planes, and it's a whole process, and it does take a while. It takes longer than we would hope. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Check out Axiom News Network. Obviously, subscribe and like the YouTube channel. You can get all our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, or wherever you get your other podcasts. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week.